If you look at the population of young people across the continent, it's 400 million. And this is projected to rise by, say, 40% by 2030. There's so many people in fields that they didn't necessarily study for, just because they were able to, tap into their, innovative mindset and entrepreneurial mindset and move a different direction. Yeah, so one of our criteria, select Ashoka Fellows is what we're calling ethical fiber. So that tells you how this is important values. Of course, there are other criteria, but ethical fiber. Because we believe if you are a social entrepreneur or a change maker, you're not going to drive change to its fullest. Your fullest potential if you're not ethical. If you look at it, it's a steep mountain. Yeah, but it has to be climbed.
Yeah, it's a steep mountain with 100 kg. See, about it.
Yeah, is exactly. But we have to mount it.
Yeah.
They say culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
So culture underpins everything. It processes that you have, maybe the system, the strategy, the vision. It'll be culture.
Vincent Odhiambo is the regional director for Ashoka East Africa. Ashoka is a leading global change-making organization that has worked with over 4,500 social entrepreneurs in the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as Asia, Europe, and Africa. Vincent's work is around identifying and supporting leading social entrepreneurs, seeding their culture of change-making, as well as building a stronger ecosystem for social innovation and social entrepreneurship. He has worked with leaders across diverse sectors to leverage their experience and expertise in enabling them to be better change makers. In his role, he engages and works closely with the East Africa and Africa team, as well as the global team, across different sectors and generations. Vincent has expertise in building effective teams, developing cross-cultural collaborative strategies, driving entrepreneurial development, and creating strategic opportunities for systems change. Vincent is also the board chair of Lightup Impact, a social enterprise building a movement of over 100 grassroots leaders across East Africa. He is also the board treasurer of Konexio Africa. At Konexio, he supports them in driving digital skills and training programs for marginalized groups, particularly women refugees. And through this, he has enabled them to get online freelance work and generally increase their revenues. Vincent is also an advisory board member for Girls Be Change, a social business that enables and empowers girls and women to be explorers and change makers. And until recently, he was one of the strategic advisors for the International Network for Advocating or for Advancing Science and Policy. Vincent is very passionate about Africanizing Africa's social entrepreneurs and socioeconomic development, and he regularly shares his opinion on and his ideas both locally and in the international stage. In this conversation, we would engage Vincent around social entrepreneurship, technology for good, governance, systems change, as well as building the ecosystem in Africa, particularly on social entrepreneurship. Hi there, welcome to the Startup Evangelists, Ideas for Africa. I'm joined with Vincent from Ashoka East Africa. Thank you for having us at your office and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and maybe to just go straight into it. You've been a leader an organizer, and entrepreneur. For your years in Ashoka and prior, probably you could briefly describe your life's mission, what you do at Ashoka, and why you believe it's quite important.
Good. Good way to start. I would think of myself as a co-leader and a co-convener at Ashoka.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is I work with a team, a really brilliant team, to find leading social entrepreneurs and support them to scale their innovations. As a co-convener, I work with leaders from across the different sectors, government, private sector, you name it, basically to help build this movement we're calling a movement of everyone a changemaker world.
Yeah.
But my leadership journey, did not start in a boardroom. Yes, like you've mentioned.
Yeah.
It has been from lived experience, paying attention to what's happening around me from a very young age, noticing broken systems, getting conscious about, injustice, inequality, and imbalance.
Yeah.
And that sort of informed how I started, intervening with these issues, from organizing fellow young people to come up with solutions at a very young age. And that has sort of been my journey, finding solutions, supporting solutions that can scale, especially looking at how do we get those solutions to effect systems level change. So I'd say that is my mission.
Yeah.
More of a barrier mover, especially for young people, women, and also marginalized. Yeah.
And what would you say was growing up were the key sort of things that stood out for you that, led you to this kind of path you are in right now? Yeah.
It is a lot. There's a lot. If you can think of our education system, when you start noticing that the education system is locking a very big population out, or some, cannot access it, or just because, people are not graduating with the requisite skills. So that's one. You look at the health sector as well. I had, people close to me that were affected directly. And those are things that I was interfacing, I was engaging.
So personal experiences around, for example, healthcare, and you noticed how the system was broken, but then also personal experiences, noticing how our educational system is set up and how it's sort of, maybe not as inclusive or game-changing for a lot of young people.
Yeah, exactly. So both personal experiences, directly and also indirectly. But I also think just the fact that I also started, relating to what was happening from a very young age, through reading newspapers, for instance, paying attention to news, both local affairs and global affairs, started understanding the inequalities, the injustices, and just putting that within, the different systems that these injustices and inequalities and imbalances were playing. So I grew up with that in mind. And so my leadership journey, began around finding my voice, but also being the voice for those who are sort of voiceless. Again, I'm saying from a very young age, because some of these things, it's not about the title, it's not about the position. It's about that sense of awareness, what we call, awareness in action. So getting to do something because of what you're becoming conscious about.
An interesting question we always get asked by young people. So how do you decide on what to focus on? You notice all these systemic problems, there's healthcare, education, income inequality, poverty, you name it. And you are observing all this across sort of, your community, where you are growing up. What do you, how did you get to a point and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this and ignore this, but not saying it's not important, but this is what I'm going to work on.
Yeah, there isn't like a lot of analysis that goes into it. I mean, because then you fall into the trap, and now
Overthinking or crisis
overthinking,
analysis.
yeah.
Yes.
So it's what is the one thing that you feel so passionate about? Like you feel this is something that I can make a contribution in terms of finding a solution for it. And of course, at a young age, it does not necessarily mean it's going to be a sophisticated solution or completely well thought through, but it's where you start finding, your power as a change maker. So this is where you begin to iterate with ideas, for instance, and also realizing, identifying who else, you can work with to find a solution. So for me, it was all these so many things happening around. But as a young person, of course, then my thinking was always around what is it that I can do with my fellow young people? How can I, build
With the resources you had.
resources? Yeah. So just thinking the immediate challenge and the resources that you have around you. I think for young people, and most of the time we talk about lack of resources, but it's just the inability to think creatively, with the resources that are around us. So what I always tell young people is you don't have to overthink it. I mean, just give yourself the permission and that sense of freedom, because no one is going to give it to you. And when you do that, then you're likely to, start bidding on a solution.
Yeah.
And then also when you start with that mindset, always thinking as a problem solver, thinking of coming up with a solution for something, then it becomes part of your DNA. As you grow up, then, you always spotting these different challenges and thinking, how do we come up with a solution on what is my role in, developing a solution?
Yes. So I've heard of, you've said, quite a keen observer, and also you are quite, and adapt to, working with the resources and the cards you are dealt with. And I think that sort of has led you to this journey you're on. Maybe a question I would ask, Ashoka has worked quite extensively globally. I think at the time I was looking at your website, you mentioned more than 4,500 social entrepreneurs and change makers. And that term, social entrepreneurship, is a buzzword these days. But maybe from your own perspective, your own definition, what would you term, or how would you define social entrepreneurship, and particularly in the context of Africa? I know it can mean, so many things in different parts of the world, but from the context of Africa, what does it really mean?
Yeah. So, the social entrepreneurship, I think it's no longer just a buzzword. I think, the world is getting to that realization that
it's becoming more mainstream.
It's becoming more mainstream.
Yeah.
And this is essentially because we are seeing the problems or the challenges that social entrepreneurs are addressing are global. So we always look at social entrepreneurs as, men and women who are coming up with solutions, paying attention to how these challenges are happening locally, but with solutions that are global, have the potential to go global. So for me, I think this is something that is a prerequisite for Africa, but then globally as well. If you look at the traditional model of the traditional business, the focus is on profit. The reason why a business sort of is profit. But despite that, and despite the huge positive contribution, traditional businesses have made, there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of really creating a world that is more equal, more just. And this really goes back to the system that we are talking about. And so we need to start really going beyond mainstreaming and having this also as a paradigm that is looked together at the same, weighing scale with the traditional business. Because the focus of social entrepreneurship is the social impact, really finding a solution for those social issues that the government probably is not in a position to address just because of the magnitude. And the traditional businesses are not in a position to do that because, like I said, the focus is on bringing value to shareholders. So I think for Africa, it goes without saying. I mean, if we're going to outmatch these challenges with solutions, then we have to have more social entrepreneurs. But beyond just having social entrepreneurs, because the entrepreneurship itself is a mindset. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Beyond just having social entrepreneurs, we have to move to a place where everyone has the confidence and sense of freedom to come up with solutions. There are so many challenges, of course. When you think of, there's no sector that you can think about across Africa that has no challenge. And this is not just because it's Africa, it's just the nature of the world. Because systems change, things come with opportunities, but also those things that come with opportunities also come with challenges. Take, for example, tech.
Yeah.
So I think for Africa, one, the myriad challenges across the continent is one reason why we really need to focus and build more social entrepreneurs and changemakers, but also the strength that are on the continent. We talk about the resources, but most importantly, the human resource. If you look at the population of young people across the continent, it's 400 million. And this is projected to rise by, say, 40% by 2030. So if we can invest in young people more in terms of the mindset, like just putting their mindset, having them get their mindset right. In fact, yes, it's good to start a business. It's good to start an enterprise. But it's even better when you position your enterprise to solve for the most, pressing challenges of the continent.
And then for just zeroing in on that, social entrepreneurship is, you said, entrepreneurship is a mindset. But specifically on social entrepreneurship, the focus goes beyond profits. Because again, we need to build maybe businesses that are bankable, sustainable economically, but the focus is more beyond profits. From your perspective, what would be the key sort of metrics that would define a venture to be a social enterprise, for example, or whatever I'm doing as an individual? I have that sort of social entrepreneurship as a true North Star.
Yeah. So there are frameworks on how to measure social impact. Right. If I look at the network of these leading social entrepreneurs that we work with and we support, the success is at the systems level. Okay, so how many policies are changing because of the work that I'm doing, so that then whatever it is becomes a norm.
So the levers of change are beyond it's just business or venture. It's on a system kind of level.
A system level. Of course, there are those who will focus on direct services, and there will be impact of the direct impact level. How many people, for instance, have you reached, access to your goods or services, and that's a level of impact. How many organizations or institutions are adopting your model? So that could be indirect. Then the third level of systems change. So how many people are changing their mindset because of what you've introduced? How many, like I said, policies, are coming out because of what you're doing? What industries are changing their norms and their ways, their regulations of the way of doing things because of your product or your service? And also looking at the market dynamics. How are you changing market dynamic in terms of is your product creating an opportunity for new markets or developing, access, finding access to new markets? Yeah. So this is how things. I mean, we say, it's good to have the direct impact and also indirect impact, but more sustainable, meaningful, large-scale change is at the systems level.
I guess also, like for a number of social entrepreneurs, they're already busy enough, doing their own little thing in their community. But I guess it helps now being part of a network like Ashoka, where now you can move the conversation at the system level, at the policy level, at country level or even regional level. I guess that would be how I would say maybe Ashoka has been quite transformative.
Yeah, there is always need for collaboration, cooperation, and of course support.
Yeah.
So like for Ashoka, we support, these social entrepreneurs within our network who are selected to be Ashoka Fellows by providing them capital. We want to make sure that they focus on building this idea too, and that it can stand that sense of community, that sense of identity. And maybe something that I should have mentioned, the term social entrepreneurship didn't exist until early 80s. That was because of the work of our founder, Bill Drayton. So that sense of identity and community goes a long way in one, of course, assuring that they're not alone. And also having a space where you can, connect with your peers, build big, better ideas, collaboration and co-creation. And also we facilitate a lot, conversations and opportunities then to cooperate with the private sector, with government. And
that's opening up opportunities where maybe themselves as individuals would not have had access. Maybe if it's big corporate, government, you would probably pave the way for them to have that level of access.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you've been, Ashoka has been around for a long time, and I know there are success stories, examples. Maybe, top of memory, you could pick over a few social entrepreneurs or social enterprises. And maybe, from where you've, having interacted with them, what were the things you said were the key highlights that made them quite successful? Because also we are quite aware the failure rate in startups and businesses is quite high, not only in Africa, but, globally. But from, having worked with some of these successful ventures, what would you say, were the key sort of highlights for their success here?
Yeah, so one thing, there's several. So the fundamental one is they started when they were young. So across
from like young in terms of youthful,
teenage age, yeah. So these are people who are entrepreneurial, very creative.
So the mindset was there very early on.
Yeah, so that's something that cuts across the mindsets. They have the mindset, right? Because like I say, it's a journey, and it can be lonely, and it can be stressful,
and also hard to teach all.
It's hard, yeah. So that's one thing.
Yeah,
and then the second thing is the skills. There are certain sets of skills which you're calling changemaker skill that really sets them apart from many other entrepreneurs. Being able to think creatively when solving for the challenges that they're solving, or when they're developing their products. So what you're calling creative problem solving. They also demonstrate high, affinity to sophisticated way of organizing, what we call, sophisticated teamwork. So thinking beyond their sector, thinking who else, how does my product or service bring value to the different players across
the ecosystem and the value chain.
Understanding how what they're doing brings value, to the different players. And of course, the kind of leadership they demonstrate, leadership, they are very humble in terms of knowing they're not the alpha and omega of everything. Information and knowledge does not just rest with them. So I think it's just that openness to work with other people, to move barriers for others, also to find their footing. Their footing.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things that have really made them, excel. But of course, coming to the maybe the technical aspect of things, I think it's understanding how to the bolts and nuts of really putting together an enterprise. So most of the time, in fact, we talk about the failure rate of startups, and we tend to look external factors, and we will talk about policy or legal frameworks that are not supportive, which is true. We talk about lack of funding or access to financing and all this. There's a lot of external facing challenges, but most entrepreneurs also forget the internal bolts and nuts. So the stuff you have control over, as you're setting up. And also, what's your end game? They say most of the time, again, you have enterprises that are set up because, I've seen something similar, just a replication of what they've seen. But then,
So that
not
means
necessarily the context. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And then you've mentioned the very interesting aspects, the change maker kind of philosophy, and also for these social entrepreneurs who've been successful, the ability to almost be very complex in how they structure teams and even beyond their organizations or their farms, for example. Is there do you feel like we are getting at a place where that level of maturity of social entrepreneurs in the continent or in Kenya or other markets you've been focusing on, are we there yet? Or what would you say would be the things that need to happen to get us to that sort of level? Is it, for example, is it something that should be incorporated in our educational curriculum, or how do we sort of bridge that knowledge gap? For example, for entrepreneurs who are starting quite young.
Yeah. There, a lot has been done.
Yeah.
I think we can say the last 20 or so years, there's been a lot of conversation that are meaningful and resulted to some changes.
Yeah.
This is just understanding, for instance, with education. I mean, what is the philosophy of education? I mean, plus the question, why are we educating people the way we are doing it? And there's a shift, slow but gradual. I think also globally, where there is that appreciation that the education system that we have was not necessarily for to raise entrepreneurs, innovators.
More like
it is for
workers,
factory workers, right? So there is that realization. So a lot of conversation, whether in terms of curriculum redesigning, pedagogy, and collaboration between academia and the industry, are all geared towards preparing younger generation and the next generation innovators or entrepreneurs. So there is that, but there is also a lot that still needs to be done. For instance, when you think about the growing up, learning and work experience, that entire value chain must be aligned. Do we have
our life experiences like
the young people have where you have control over? Do young people have the right allies to work with them when they're kids? Help them begin to identify problems and to begin to see themselves not as just statistics, but as problem solvers. So are we giving them enough experience at a young age to open up their minds around it's no longer business as usual, where if you go to school, you study law, you become a lawyer forever and ever. I mean, that's no longer tenable. There's so many people in fields that they didn't necessarily study for, just because they were able to, tap into their, innovative mindset and entrepreneurial mindset and move a different direction. So we need to have that happening.
And even sometimes it takes an outsider to come and disrupt an industry. If we are all lawyers in the room or doctors, we are almost, we've resigned that this problem exists, and but now maybe as someone else, an external sort of party can maybe come with a different way of attacking the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. So because most of the time people who are within particular system, I mean, they don't see the need to fix it. It's not broken. Why fix it? Many people will say that are people who, as the way the system is working.
Even we create business models that almost perpetuates the problem. I'm sure it's now public knowledge what's been happening around the not-for-profits industry. We set up a not-for-profit for ending poverty. But we don't really end it, because now if we end it, what would be the argument for having it? So I think I get your perspective, like, even the ally essence for these young people growing up is quite important.
So in essence, the flow that we must address in all this is, the flow where the flow in the entire setup, the systems, is where people don't have the mindset, the network, the skill set to really step up and come up with solutions. So that's the flow. So whether we're talking about access to fund or financing, do the institutions responsible for this, are they looking at data of law? When if we invest this, then it opens up opportunity for more people to really come into the fold as entrepreneurs, innovators. So that's a flaw that we need to address. It's a fundamental flaw. Like, how do we enable? How do we create spaces? How do we provide resources, to open up, democratize, so to speak, entrepreneurship,
And also make it okay that this is a viable and career. I think it's common knowledge that in most families, when you tell your folks that you want to be an entrepreneur, they almost want to take you to therapy.
yeah.
Taking you high on something. So I think that making that that the culture be embracive, I think that's probably something you mentioned that could be a game changer.
Yeah. And what it take is for the people who are holding some of these spaces to start realizing that the world has changed. Things have changed. I mean, for instance, the economic model as we've known it is no longer tenable. Because if, for instance, we say the industries are creating jobs, and the question that then we should be asking ourselves is, what are these jobs? We talk about this is jobs, yes, but are they well paid?
There's also like the argument that some of these jobs are temporary jobs for you are almost perfecting your skill for the AI or the robot.
No, exactly.
You're almost training technology to take you off.
Yeah. But what should be? I mean, so there's this thing that a job, I mean, is a jail of bondage. Jail of bondage.
Yeah.
So if you frame it that way, to anyone who is resisting, or who becoming a blocker for young people to get into entrepreneurship, if you frame it that thing, they will think twice.
Yeah, so true. And then I know it's almost like we've already started talking about it. Systems thinking. We've at least touched on the edges. Maybe let's just go straight into it. What is it, and how do we approach it? Maybe from even, let's say, Kenya or Africa. How do we sort of make a dent around systemic approach to to social entrepreneurship, or even to growing our ecosystem.
The world, the setup is systems, different systems. We talk about the economy, that it's a system. Talk about beliefs is a system. Politics is a system. So they're all systems, and within systems there are elements and the relationship between those elements. So the systems thinking, and as you think about changing at a systems level, is to understand the relationship within these systems, and
how different systems interplay or sort of work together.
How fast, of course, the different elements in the system interplay. So you would know if, for instance, I mean, if I want to change, market dynamics, then maybe access to information, farmers, in terms of what prices are happening. So I'll have to understand what are the different elements within that system. There are brokers. I mean, how would they take this?
What are the incentive structures for each of those players? So, brokers, farmers, farmer groups, cooperatives, exporters, importers, etc.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. To change a system, one of the things that we are seeing from, this leading change makers is to understand how this change is going to bring value to the different players. Because the resistance usually, because where is the value? Any change is seen to be disruptive. So if you're not able to show the value, then of course there'll be pushback. A good example that comes to mind is an Ashoka Fellow working in West Africa, in Togo to be precise. And what he did, he does, is revolutionizing the e-waste, sort of space. So started working with government, started working with the local guys who are collecting, waste. Waste, yeah. And of course, government had vested interests, and all these different players have vested interests. With the fragmented, everyone is collecting whatever neighborhood type of space. But he was able to bring them together to show them that in from a collective approach, you'll get this faster and you get recognition from government. And also being able to show government, this does help you a great deal, because of course, then you're able to demonstrate that, you are way ahead other countries in terms of thinking of e-waste, disposing of e-waste, but also gives you an opportunity to gather data that will help you come up with better policies around this. So win-win. So everyone, along that space saw the value.
Yeah.
So the initial resistance, and of course he overcame that through raising awareness.
So you can't even escape the education, like educating the different stakeholders. It can take even years, just making the buy-in from the government, the consumers, and everyone involved. Yeah.
And I think also that's something that most of the time many founders miss out on. You've heard of this, like you get so obsessed with your solution, you're so obsessed with the solution to a point you're forgetting it's not your solution. You're trying to solve for other people. You're trying to develop a product for a market or a service, but you're so obsessed with it, you forget to test it with them, get their buy-in.
Yeah, and I say fall in love with the solution.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a solution. This is my solution, but there's likelihood that that challenge or whatever you wanted to solve has morphed into something else.
Yeah. And then right to that is the concept of value-based leadership. I know, Ashoka, you're quite big on this. Because it takes, I guess, the proverbial everything rises and falls on leadership. It takes sort of a value-based system for you to move from strictly for profit only approach. Maybe if you are to unpack what would be an analysis of what means to be a value-based leader or a value-based leadership approach.
Yeah. So one of our criteria, select Ashoka Fellows is what you're calling ethical fiber. So that tells you how this is important values. Of course, there are other criteria, but ethical fiber. Because we believe if you are a social entrepreneur or a change maker, you're not going to drive change to its fullest. Your fullest potential if you're not ethical. But also just taking a step back, I think whether it's for profit or social enterprises, whatever, I think there is culture is the foundation of how we will build towards our vision. And so that culture must be defined by a certain set of values. And those values must, of course, be, values that are oscillating between what is social, what is ethical. So for me, it's really, really, really important beyond just at the organizational level, even at the national level, think globally. We need to get to a point where we are looking at all the imbalances we talk about, whether it's imbalance of resources, injustice or inequalities, because these are the malaise that are affecting the world.
Yeah,
like everyone across is trying to solve for this. If we are to develop antidotes for all these different issues, then they must be founded. They must be practiced in a culture that, is supportive of those values.
Let me play devil's advocate. Corruption, has been there for long, ever since human beings were created. But it's in some markets, it feels like that is the only way to get ahead, particularly for entrepreneurs, either getting stuff, done from the government or getting an edge over your competition. Someone will say, okay, I get it, Vincent, you want me to, have this ethical fiber and have a value-based moral. But my day-to-day is this. I want to do this good, whether it's, e-waste or something else, but I need to do it sustainably, so maybe how do you circumvent, an environment as a social entrepreneur where you really, ethical, moral fiber is your true north, but the incentives, in the markets, where you're being placed, it makes it quite difficult. I don't know if it's something now as Ashoka, because of your network and all the fellows and volunteer network, if that's something sort of you try to enable, maybe to create an alternative community around it.
Yeah. So it's about shifting, changing the paradigm. I mean, so this is something that has been there for so long. You always, if you look at it, it's a steep mount. Yeah, but it has to be climbed.
Yeah, it's a steep mountain with 100 kg. See, about
is exactly. But we have to mount it.
Yeah.
So it's not always like a big mass of people starting it as a small group. Yeah, people getting that started. So for instance, when you talk about an everyone a change maker, well, that's exactly what we mean. If you're a change maker, you're not going to things that are harmful. You're not going to push, let's say, products that are harmful. You're not going to push services that are harmful. You're going to be considerate when you're coming up with innovations and all that. And so for me, we have to give ourselves the permission, and we have to be confident that it can be done. So it means starting from where we are. So for instance, here at Ashoka East Africa, we recognizing that, the spaces, the environment for developing, values also can sort of different their nuances. So we have a set of values that are driving our culture, and the culture that we are looking at is a culture that is, collaborative, and a culture that advances psychological safety, and not just within the team but also outside. So my point is that there has to be intentionality in all this. You have to be very intentional. Say these are the values that are going to drive our culture. Once we're very clear our vision, many people are reluctant to embrace the idea of change making, or everyone a change maker. But over time, we are seeing whether it's at the global level, hear leaders talking about the need to have empathy in action, for instance, which is essentially what change making is all about. And so it takes time, but then there has to be intentionality around it, and also
reality that maybe this is, I think what you mentioned, the intentionality also couples with, you need to think long term. Sees, maybe something that might even take possibly a generation. But change will eventually happen.
Exactly. It takes a while. I mean, so they're just using a similar methodology in terms of getting social entrepreneurship to be now mainstreamed is what we're doing. I mean, if you look at the current reality, what is happening, us versus them, because of the this new inequality. This new inequality, I mean, is in so many ways can also be seen from the lens of those who have really mastered these skills, the change making skills, and they are excelling, and they're working with their peers who have also mastered these skills and across different sectors.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there is a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And those who don't have these skills are the ones who are now being left behind. And so I think it's, like I said, the intentionality and, the early adopters having methodological way of getting it to become the new norm.
And then I think you've mentioned the early adopters, because I think those are mostly the people who would, carry the vision and be the proverbial, Moses or whoever, Joshua's. And I think probably that and, the first supporters would form the critical mass. And then you start seeing culture changing. I think, being in Kenya, we've seen, how the political conversation has evolved the last couple of years, particularly around the youth on social media and the like. So I think it's sort of maybe that mindset lands, once you get the early adopters going and the supporters, you have sort of critical mass. Yeah.
Yeah. And even just, and that's the reason why I think the best investment we can offer to young people is creating those spaces for them to grow in confidence and that sense of freedom that they can bring about change, So that seemed to have been lost maybe at some point, but there is some kind of, revival of that. And it's a beautiful thing to see. Yeah, people are seeing that they can actually contribute to national conversations, that they can do something about, what they're seeing around.
They are being active participants in the...
Exactly. So being active participants. And, so those are some of the realities that we're talking about. If you look at the agitation that, is being led by young people across the globe, really. And of course, this is the biggest population. Then
they're really asking very interesting and direct, and at some point someone has to address them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's getting those early adopters, people are ready to and convinced. I mean, so that then values are not just things that we post somewhere on our walls.
Website.
It's a website.
Yeah.
It's things that must be lived in. That's why I was saying in every space, if you think, because I think culture, they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, So culture underpins everything. I mean, it processes that you have, maybe the system, the strategy, the vision, it'll be culture. So as we say, everything falls and rises with leadership.
Yeah.
I think everything falls and rises with culture. It's a vision. So if we think culture, then we must think what vision, what values do we want to have that will drive this culture. And when we do that, then we start having the critical mass. Then you then have a trigger community. Then you have the wholesale adopters. You'll have, let's say, publishers talking about stories of change or changemakers doing things differently, highlighting those who are making those bold, big moves and beginning to put incentives in terms of positive recognition of those who are living this kind of life and then reinforcing it, so then it becomes a norm, but then it's a long-term game.
You've triggered my memory. There's a place a couple of friends used to work, and the company was, I think, listing their values. One of the values was love. But unfortunately, there was no love.
It's not manifesting.
It wasn't manifesting. People are leaving.
Yeah.
And drops. So I guess you're saying, the need to move now to embody and, have these values as a lived experience. Maybe as we sort of try to land the plane, we know a lot of young people, since the conversation has been around that, a lot of young people in Africa and, globally are digital natives. Social media, AI, blockchain, fintech, those are their tools of trade, either socially or even entrepreneurially, or even from an employment perspective. And Ashoka has been big on the term technology for humanity. And And we know technology is an important tool for either scaling ventures, across markets, across regions. Maybe from your perspective, what would you say that is? And particularly for entrepreneurs who are building in tech, how can they approach the aspect of technology for humanity and embed it in their sort of products or business models?
Yeah, I mean, right, because I mean, I see, many times when you talk about innovation, people think tech. Now it's almost becoming a norm. About innovation, I think it has to be tech enabled innovation, or it has to be something with an app. It has to be something with an app. Yeah. And you're having challenges, connecting with your neighbors. Get the energy is, so then they're two very strong I'd say narratives out there. So there's one that is romanticizing tech, like everything is tech. We have to have tech-enabled solutions. This is the this is what we need. Like, it's a silver bullet.
It's like it will solve
everything. But then
governance.
Yes. With affordability, throw in tech there, and you're sorted. And then, of course, there is a narrative around the doom and gloom now. People talk, especially since AI, right? And everyone is
just everyone's joy.
Yes. So I visually find myself having this conversation, saying, I mean, look here, even the TV set at the beginning, even the telephone, the landline that we use, there were resistance. I mean, there were all these narratives that this is going to, connect these people. Having to fight, parents will be home early enough by the time kids are from school, so that they're there whenever any call is made. So tech, I mean, all these kind of improvements always have these two different narratives. I think for us, and for us in Africa, really, the question should be, what is that, tech innovation for? What is it being used for? Is it for who is coming up with it? Like, I mean, those are fundamental questions that we should be asking ourselves. If it's not being deployed for the common good of all, if it's not being deployed in ways that reduces inequality, but does the opposite, if it is not being deployed in ways that addresses injustices, and if it is not being deployed in ways that sort of spreads resources, then it is not for humanity. Then it's back to the traditional business for profit. So we need to be thinking about tech that way. And that is what, as Ashoka, we look at. What is the purpose for this? Is it something that really does address the pressing challenges? And also, is it something that is really looking at the common good of all? We're not saying that maybe it should not be making profit, but also, and then it's here.
I think you've touched on a note there. I think I saw something online around. I think someone was listing all the popular apps, and in parallel, all the human vices that are able. So, for example, if it's Facebook, it's envy. If it's Tinder, it's lust. If it's Instagram, attention, greed, or and at times, sometimes even the technologies and the algorithms and the engines behind these tools, for them to scale, they kind of enable that worst, the worst part of human beings. It's very hard to have a trending topic on X, around, unity or.
Yeah. You say that the algorithms most of the time are, premised on polarization. So it's what, will be adapted. And that is what. And so I think as we even think about the tech solutions, it's also important for us to, number one, of course, think about the culture.
So that the tech also, can thrive within a culture that enables it.
Exactly. So what's a culture? I mean, what is it that we're thinking about tech? Because also there's just we don't want to get into a situation where there is apathy around tech innovations. I mean, we've seen the leapfrogging, whether it's in education, in health, in agriculture. There's a lot of positive things that have come with that. So we want to make, I mean, the ideal situation would be where we have a culture that does embrace tech, but also very critical around where is it coming from and who's using it and why and all these kind of things.
There's incentives of creators of those platforms.
Exactly.
Because also they can infuse their own biases.
Yeah. And then, of course, in terms of regulations, also, I think every other innovation, there is always need to regulate. But then put some guardrails, but not the ways that this, exactly, not to stifle it.
Yeah.
But for tech now, the challenge is that it's moving pretty fast. So what does that mean in terms of the regulators and people who are mandated, have these guardrails? They should be able to move that fast as well. And so what kind of people will be able to move that fast? Comes back to people who are change makers. Even if you're not a change maker, you're not going to see what is the pattern, what is the trend, and how do I, move forward bold.
Even it means the regulators also have to have a foresight. When you're building these policies, you kind of envision how the market is going to evolve and build it for because, for the future that is coming.
Yeah. I mean, it will need a lot of cross-sectoral conversations and collaboration and co-creation. We've seen so many instances. I mean, there's one that I always think about. I laugh because I think it is just unbelievable. So you have one arm of the government working on something really well thought through, and it's needed, like creating a solution. But the solution done, completed, this is it, we have this. Then all of a sudden another department realizes this solution is actually a barrier to something and we can't have it.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's ought to be a lot of that. That's why it's important to have like the startup ecosystem being very, collaborative rather than competing. There's still a lot of competition around that in that ecosystem, and also working towards.
And then I think it also aligns with mindset.
It aligns with mindset.
You have scarcity as a mindset. Yeah. Everything is up for grabs, so it's always competition, tech.
Yeah. And the thing for me is that there are startups that are coming up, and the founders are very clear in their minds that I want to find a solution. This is a solution for a pressing challenge. They're very clear. And I always say those are the real ones. They're pushing the real, paradigm. I'll explain it. Then there are those who are also, they think, I'm coming up with this solution, this product, this service to solve for a challenge, but they are in the deal, mindset. So the deal mindset
Transaction
is what is, it's the cause of all. Whether we think about government, we think of, the private sector, there's a deal mindset. I always talk about this as dollar-driven, then the team, dollar-driven, extractive, accumulative, and lack of, responsibility.
So deal, dollar-driven, extractive, accumulative, and lack of responsibility.
There's a lot of lack of responsibility, take ownership, responsibility in that area.
Yeah.
But the real one is where social entrepreneurs and many more emerging, leaders across different sectors are now gearing towards, very realistic, and also engaging. So making sure that everyone is on board, adaptive and legacy driven. So you're thinking about legacy, beyond the profit, beyond satisfying your shareholders. What legacy do I want to leave as an individual, as a CEO, as a politician, as a leader? and what legacy do I want this institution to have?
To carry, yeah.
And what legacy do I want the next generation to pick?
Yeah.
So I think for me, they shouldn't be competing
Yeah.
ideologies, but then also there should be as much, focus on the contribution that they bring to the socioeconomic development of a country, of a continent.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. A lot of cheer on that. I think on what you've mentioned, specifically around, what founders and also what governments should do. I think that's where the nuts and bolts of the whole issue is. And I think we're sort of in that space where, it's time to have those adults and those hard conversations, because the market is asking for it. The young people are asking for it. So maybe as we wind down, I know we were speaking offline on stuff you're working on, in particular in Africa. Maybe you want to highlight some of those. What is Ashoka in Africa thinking? We've seen the global movement really take off, and maybe we are a few years behind on that. So there's a lot I'm sure you're working on in various chapters. Maybe a snip sort of on that, and maybe an invitation to partnership, whoever is out there, and how can they engage and connect with your work?
Like you said, Daniel, social entrepreneurship is no longer, on the periphery.
Yes,
mainstream.
It's in the
and we are seeing more and more challenges, coming up, and we are seeing more evidence that the people who are best placed to solve for these challenges are social entrepreneurs. So as Ashoka, across Africa, we want to find more social entrepreneurs. We want to work with them, support them. So the first thing across the continent is to continue building on this movement.
So if you're a social entrepreneur out there,
exactly. If you're a social entrepreneur,
connect and ping and disturb Vincent.
Yes. We want to see how we can collaborate.
Yeah,
that's one.
Yeah.
And because this is already, something that the thinking around social entrepreneurship is already being taken up by NGOs, corporates, and private sector faith-based organizations. We are also open to collaborating with them to help them kind of bring our frameworks, the methodologies, what has really worked. Why is it that Ashoka was able to get all these leading social entrepreneurs way before the world knew about them?
Yeah.
So we have those frameworks, the tools, and methodologies that we can support any entity that is thinking of doing things differently for the common good of all. And then, of course, thirdly, we've talked about the young population. Young people we have as a continent globally. A generation that is really yearning for purpose-driven and commitment. They don't want to stay in one place just because it's, I'm earning this. They want purpose. So we want to work. We're working also with different institutions to support them in terms of aligning this experience for young people from growing up to learning and work, so that then they find their place within those spaces. So how do we build cultures, systems, and processes that bringing young people who are change makers, and how do we retain change makers who are within institutions?
Yeah.
So that's also another area of collaboration that we are open to having conversations around.
Yeah, and I like what you mentioned, because I think that's the sort of the cusp of even breaking the brain drain and ensuring entrepreneurs and organizations have tools within their communities to work on solutions, so that they don't feel they need a savior or a messiah from elsewhere, or even leave or forced to leave their environment for to get livelihoods elsewhere. So I think quite commendable what you're doing, and looking forward to the coming days ahead. I think we'll possibly share all the resources and contacts, and also what Ashoka and what you're doing on our pages, and people can engage post this conversation.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
And also commendable work you're doing.
Yeah.
We've always said there's need to shift the narrative that is coming from Africa. So the work that you're doing with the podcast, it's contributing big way.
Yeah.
You might not see it now, but definitely this is the kind of narrative that we want, the generation that is coming to
build on,
interact with, and of course, people out there to also understand the nuances that are informing, Africa's startup, space, but also the leadership space and the new paradigm that we are developing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you so much.